What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, we're going to break down Week 3 in Premier Lacrosse League action. A bit of a shorter show here today, heading into Week 3 on Friday night. We'll start out the show talking some Player Royale and get into the weekly picks. As always, then the second half of the show, we're going to round out the show, getting your thoughts in the mix as always. So again, a bit of a shorter show here today, but to jump right into it, don't forget to join my PLL Player Royale Challenge on the PLL app. I'll send that link out usually every Thursday or Friday heading in to that week's action, so you guys can join me there. I'm currently undefeated through 2 weeks in Player Royale action. It's been a lot of fun so far, and currently I sit 7th on the overall leaderboard on the PLL app in Player Royale point standings, so looking to make that move hopefully this weekend into that top 5 overall, but we'll see how it goes, and we'll recap it here on the podcast on Monday. This week, for me at least, picking my team in Player Royale was a bit of a challenge compared to the first 2 weeks. But still some familiar faces within my 5-man lineup, a couple new faces as well, and again, I'll break those down for you here in just a second. But to go through my Player Royale lineup here for Week 3 in the PLL, at attack, I have Tier 1 Jeff Teat. At midfield, I have Tier 1 Jake Furcaro. On defense, Tier 2, I have Michael Earhart. On faceoff, Tier 2, Connor Farrell. And in goal, Tier 3, my Tier 3 selection for the week is Jack Kincannon. So again, just to break down these picks of the players that I selected here this week, Jeff Teat, I think, is going to be a mainstay on many people's Player Royale lineups week in and week out, no matter who they're playing, because through 2 weeks, he's averaging 6 points per game in 2022. So again, a very productive player when he has the ball on his cross. He's going to get other people involved while also scoring his share of goals offensively for the Atlas this year. So 6 points a game through 2 weeks. He's one of the points leaders in the PLL overall. And going into Week 3 against the Whipsnakes, his over-under on total points this weekend is 5.5. So it'll be interesting to see if he is able to hit that over, because that's, in all honesty, that's a really big number, which we'll talk about the picks in just a second. But again, just Jeff Teat, a guy that's really hard to go against on any given week in Player Royale. So he's my attackman again this week. In the midfield, I took Jake Furcaro as a Tier 1 midfielder because he's been really steady, a steady contributor in terms of fantasy production the first 2 weeks. He had 15 points back in Week 1 and then followed it up with 16 points in Week 2. He's also tied with Tom Schreiber for most points among middies with 6 points so far on the year. Had a 2-bomb as well. I believe it came in Week 2. Defensively, I've got Michael Earhart. I also had him a week ago in Week 2 as my defender, a Tier 2 defender this week. He leads all LSMs with 3 caused turnovers and 7 ground balls. So again, a really nice value with Earhart as a Tier 2 defender, knowing that he's going to go cause some turnovers. He's going to scoop up some ground balls. He can definitely have a chance to make things happen in transition. Now, will he have that opportunity this weekend against the Atlas? Maybe not, as they've so far shown an improvement on the defensive end in terms of stopping teams in transition, but still a guy that when he can get out and run can make things happen in transition, so we'll watch out for that this weekend as well. At faceoff, my other Tier 2 selection, as I said, was Connor Farrell. I tended to stay away from the Trevor Baptiste-Joe Nardella matchup this weekend between the Atlas and the Whipsnakes because, and I think I mentioned this in Week 1, is that this is one of those matchups where these guys will more than likely sort of cancel each other out. They'll go about 50-50 at the stripe this weekend. At least I would imagine it'll be somewhere around 50-50. So it's really hard for me to gauge that sort of a matchup between those two. Whereas you look at a guy like Connor Farrell, gives you one of those Tier 2 players a solid value at tier 2, especially knowing that he's third in faceoff percentage behind Joe Nardella and Trevor Baptiste, and he's going up against a replacement faceoff against the Water Dogs, whether it be Zach Tucci or whether it's Courier, who took the faceoffs for them in replacing Jake Withers a week ago. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles that matchup and whether or not he can dominate, I guess you could say, that matchup, knowing he's not going against their top guy. So again, even though he's not necessarily one of those tier 1 guys is Connor Farrell, which are Baptiste and Nardella right now, there's still, I think, at least going into this weekend, a lot of value there, knowing that he's facing off already at 63% and he's not even going against the Water Dogs top guy. And then you look at the goalie situation, where I picked Jack Kincannon this week as a tier 3 goalie. I originally went with Blaze Reardon this week, as I've done the previous 2 weekends, because it's hard, again, just kind of like with Jeff Teat, it's hard not to go with a guy that's as consistent as Blaze Reardon. I mean, you look at his performance a weekend ago, didn't have his best game in net, but still wound up going somewhere around 50% in that game and still made 10 saves, also had an assist in that game as well. So even though he didn't have such a great game by his standards, statistically, he didn't fare all too badly. But you also have to take into account, when you take a guy like Blaze Reardon this weekend, he's going up against a Redwoods offense that is last in scoring offense and tied for last in shooting percentage. So he likely won't see too many high quality shots where he'll have to make a save on it. And that's where you get that fantasy value from, is making those saves. And when you don't get as many shots on goal as the Redwoods don't, then you're not really seeing that value because you're not having to make that many saves. But on the flip side, I think with taking a guy like Kincannon is similarly to the Redwoods situation with Reardon, is that when you talk about shooting percentages, they're tied with the Whip Snakes for last in the league in shooting percentage at 22%. However, the Whip Snakes are third in shots on goal this year. So that's where you get that value at goalie with a guy like Kincannon, because you know statistically he's likely to see more shots than what Reardon will this weekend. So that's my lineup 1 through 5. Again, Jeff Teat, Jake Fricaro, Michael Earhart, Connor Farrell, and Jack Kincannon are the 5 I'm going with here this weekend. Switching gears a little bit now, getting to the picks here in the PLL in week 3 action. The first game of the weekend, the Water Dogs 0-2 taking on the 2-0 Red Hot Chrome team. My pick this weekend are the Chrome. They're minus 120 this weekend. The polls as well, currently, you can check out the polls at Stevie Mac Media is my Twitter handle, where I tweet out those polls each and every week as I go up against those Twitter polls each week throughout the regular season. We'll see at the very end who comes out on top. I currently hold a 6-2 record, while the polls are 3-5 through 2 weeks. So again, I'll take the Chrome. The polls as well currently have a strong heading for the Chrome as well. My bonus pick in this game is Zach Courier over 2.5 points at plus 145. I think with some of the injuries they have, I believe Michael Sowers is likely to be out again this weekend. Had some injury problems, as we know, a year ago. He'll be out, I think, this weekend. So with some of the injuries that the Water Dogs have, they'll be leaning on Courier, not just at the stripe, which we talked about that matchup a moment ago with Connor Farrell this weekend, not just at the stripe with a guy like Zach Courier, but he'll also be asked to carry more of the load, I think, offensively. So over 2.5 points there with Zach Courier. The second game, the nightcap on Friday night, the Atlas 2-0 against the Whip Snakes, also 2-0. My pick here, I'm officially going to go with the Atlas at minus 175. I've picked the Atlas each of the first 2 weeks. They're my team, as we all know. I'm going to stick with them here in week 3 as my official pick. However, and the polls as well took the Atlas. However, I gotta believe that there's a lot of value and there's going to be a lot of movement towards the Whip Snakes as the underdog plus 145, and that plus 1.5 is really tempting given the way that they've been finishing out games this year. The last second goal in week 1 against the Chaos, and then the overtime winner in week 2 against the Water Dogs. So the Whip Snakes plus 145, and that 1.5 just looks really good. But again, I got to stick with the Atlas here this week because like I said on Tuesday's show, I do think there comes a time where the Whip Snakes get exposed this year. And I think the Atlas are a team that you really have to play a full game against up and down the field between the arcs. And I think that the Atlas will be the team that possibly exposes the Whip Snakes this year. So give me the Atlas. The polls will take the Atlas as well. My bonus in this game is Matt Rambo over 2.5 points at minus 170. But I also have to wonder how people feel about Jeff Teat and that over 5.5 at plus 150. He did kind of ball out last year in his first game against the Whip Snakes, that game in Baltimore. I was actually there for that game. It was my first time seeing the PLL in person, so getting to watch him in his first ever PLL action was really cool. And again, he had a great game that day. And like I said earlier in segment 1, he's also averaging 6 points per game through 2 weeks. So that over 5.5 looks kind of good, but again, I'm not sure how other people feel about that one. So just something to keep in mind. But again, I'll take Matt Rambo over 2.5 points. On Saturday, the Cannons 1-1 against the 1-1 Archers. My pick in this one is the Archers minus 175. The polls currently taking the Archers as well. My bonus here is Jake Fricaro, one of those guys that I had on my Player Royale team. I'll take Jake Fricaro over 2.5 points at plus 115. Has 6 points, as I mentioned, through the first 2 weeks. He's one of the top scoring midfielders along with Tom Schreiber through the first 2 weeks of the regular season. So I'll take the over 2.5 there. And then the final game, the Redwoods 0-2 against the 0-2 Chaos. My pick here, I cannot believe the Chaos are actually considered the underdogs in this game. I'll take the Chaos plus 110. The polls as well taking the Chaos. My bonus here is Mac O'Keefe over 2.5 points at plus 100. And again, I really find it hard to believe that the Chaos are actually considered the underdogs in this game, considering the Redwoods have the last place scoring offense, their last in scoring defense. TD Erlin's only facing off at around 43%. And I read somewhere on Twitter, I think it was Joe Keegan tweeted out that the Redwoods offense currently is turning the ball over on 60% of their offensive possessions this year, which is just astronomical. So I really find it hard to believe that the Chaos are the underdogs in this game. So I feel like that's almost easy money, considering at least when you look at it, the first 2 weeks, the Chaos have at least shown that they can be competitive, that they have a pulse, whereas the Redwoods, come out in week 2 against the Chrome and only score 3 goals or 3 points, which is the lowest total of any PLL game in the history of the league so far. So again, just really hard to believe that the Chaos are considered the underdogs here in this game. Now, coming up in segment 2, again, a shorter show here leading into week 3 in the PLL, but coming up in segment 2 to round things out going into week 3, we'll get your thoughts in the mix coming up on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. All right, welcome back. Segment 2, final segment here of this shorter show heading into week 3 in the PLL. Get your thoughts in the mix to round us out here. On Twitter, at Stevie Mac Media is my Twitter handle. You can check out my profile for all show and PLL related content and discussions. That's where I do a lot of my show prepping for each and every episode. I like to get your guys' thoughts all the time, which is what we like to do here on the podcast. So Michael Grind starts us off by saying he's going to give us his picks for this weekend in the PLL. He says he's got the Chrome because they've looked great, very strong on defense especially, and the Dogs are dealing with lots of injuries. Yeah, I think that's going to be something that hurts them, especially when you talk about that battle at the stripe with Connor Farrell already facing off at 63% for the year. Now you're without a guy like Jake Withers. Now you have to look for other options, whether it be Curry or Tucci, whoever it is, to try and go up against him at the stripe and be able to give you a chance in that game. He says the Atlas have looked like the best team in the league. Whips have showed some good fight, and Nardella will compete with Baptiste, but I think the Atlas have too many weapons. Yeah, that's sort of going to be one of those matchups to watch for this weekend, is the stripe between Trevor Baptiste and Joe Nardella and how that battle goes down and who can win a few more possessions for their offense. I think that'll be a big difference in this game as the game plays out. So yeah, I think that the Atlas Whipsnakes game is going to be one of the more intriguing matchups overall this weekend, but then you talk about that matchup at the stripe as well. And yeah, I do believe that the Atlas have the ability to be that team that finally knocks off the Whipsnakes, and the Whipsnakes maybe don't win that close game this time. Maybe it goes the other way in favor of the Atlas, or maybe the Atlas just take care of business and win by 2-ish possessions. You know, that's something that we're going to have to watch for. He says, the Archers, I could go Cannons here if Lyle is back, but Ament may also be back. Could be high scoring and should be close either way. Yeah, that's something that I believe as of Thursday, they're both listed, both being Lyle Thompson and Grant Ament, both listed as questionable to play this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see if they do, in fact, suit up this weekend for their respective clubs, or maybe they give it another week. But I do think that this game, even necessarily without those two on the field, could still be one of the more higher scoring matchups of the weekend between the Archers and the Cannons. He says he has the Chaos because the Redwoods have looked bad on both sides of the ball. The Chaos still missing NLL players, but their defense and Blaze have been great. Yeah, and that's something that I mentioned in the picks at the top of the show, is that it's hard to believe that the Chaos are considered the underdogs in this game, because at least for the very least, even though they're 0-2, they've at least shown that fight, that grit. They're going to battle you for the full 4 quarters, and they're going to have a chance right down to the very end, especially as they did in week 1 against the Whipsnakes, who many people thought really had more weapons at their disposal in that game, but again, took it right down to the very end. And the Redwoods on the other side just haven't shown us much of anything positive so far through the first 2 weeks. So yeah, it's really hard to go against the Chaos here this weekend to get their first win of the season. From Coach Shrek, he says, with no Michael Sowers for the Water Dogs this weekend, who will step up and fill his shoes? Also, will the Water Dogs call up Zach Tucci to take faceoffs, or be content with Zach Courier attempting to take faceoffs? Have to believe Tucci gets the call with Withers out. So yeah, to go back to his original comment about Michael Sowers being out for the Water Dogs, that's where, when I talked about it in the picks in segment 1, that's why I have a guy like Courier over 2.5 points, because I think not only will he be asked to make an impact at the stripe, but he'll also be asked to make an impact on the offensive end with a guy like Sowers out, and have to sort of carry the load a little bit more offensively for that team. And we know he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He can take faceoffs. He's going to go after ground balls. He can cause turnovers on the defensive end. And he's also a guy that contribute in a lot of ways at the offensive end, whether it be goals, assists, whatever it may be. He's one of those midfielders that can literally do it all. So I think that that's why he's going to be asked to do it all here this weekend, in a sense. He says, do or die for the Woods. This is probably going to be their last chance to figure things out before the schedule gets tougher. Yeah, this is one of those games where you want to see them start to turn the page and show that it was just a slow start to the year, and that this isn't going to be who they are moving forward. And yeah, you're right. The schedule does get a lot tougher after this week. You talk about the following week, they have the Whipsnakes. The week after that, they have the Archers. And then the week after the All-Star break, they have the Atlas. So yeah, the schedule, definitely does not get much easier for them over the next month or so. So this really is that last chance, just like Shrek was talking about. And then finally, he says the Chaos team, despite being 0-2, is dangerous because for some of their players, they will most likely not be on the roster next week once the Bandits players return. So expect Chaos to play like there's no tomorrow. And yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and that's definitely a possible storyline even going into this weekend, is that knowing that the NLL championships are soon going to be over and the Chaos will be a team that's most impacted by that event occurring, being able to get guys like Dane Smith and Josh Byrne and whoever else back on that offensive side of things and be able to really get things going once they are back, that you're going to see some of those guys that are going to be released back into the player pool once those other guys come back. They're likely going to be playing for an opportunity to get picked up potentially by another club and be able to stick around in the PLL as the season moves on, whether it's with the Chaos or, again, whether it's with another team. So yeah, they will be essentially playing with their hair on fire at times this weekend. So that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. You can also find the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Google, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and now Stitcher as well in the mix. Also want to give a shout out to Detroit Mercy assistant lacrosse coach Charlie Hayes. Was picked up by the Water Dogs to their 25-man active roster earlier this week. So shout out to Coach Hayes on that. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.